Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to wrap up our chapter on loops, our chapter on iteration. Okay, and in 5.3 we're going to talk about something called nested loops. Now, if you thought loops were fun, you're going to love nested loops. Here we go. All right, so nested loops really aren't that bad once you get a feel for them and once you get a hang of them. So the first thing I want to do today before we get into the technical definitions and stuff like that is just give you a chance to play around with some of these nested loops here. So where I'm at right now is from Moodle, go to the 5.3 coding demonstration, and I'm going to have you just mess around with this before we get into the slideshow. Okay, what this has on it is I have 4 different methods with nested loops involved. Now the first one's written for you. I'm going to have you run that code. And the second method, what we're going to do is we have the exact same code. I want you to try to adjust the first method's code to make it into the second. Okay, so if I pull up my display, my terminal here, compile, and run. Okay, the first method prints this. The second method prints the same thing. What we want you to do is to take the second method and make it print a 5x5 array instead of the same thing there. Okay, so again, adjust the code we've already provided for you and see if you can make it print that 5x5 array. Okay, from there we'll have you kind of keep messing with it. Method 3, what you're going to do is, let's say, copy and paste your code from method 2 into method 3, but this time make a triangular array instead of a rectangle or a square. Okay, then same idea for method 4. Once you get method 3 figured out, copy and paste that into method 4, and then rather than just stars as your triangle, let's see if we can make those numbers. Okay? Give those a shot. Mess around with this for 5-10 minutes before you hit play on the video again. We'll go through the notes. We'll go through the usual PowerPoint. But again, I think this is a lot easier to understand once you kind of get a hold of it and start changing things around. Okay, don't mess with method 1. You can always use that to revert back to and kind of go through the process again if you think you screw something up. But like I said, I think you can get a lot out of playing around with this right away. So again, pause the video, mess with this stuff here, and then hit play to kind of go through the actual definitions and stuff like that. All right, so here we go with the notes. Now again, I'm hoping you did actually pause this video, play around with that coding demonstration for 5, even 10 minutes. And it's not the end of the world if you couldn't answer all those questions, you couldn't finish all those methods. Okay, hopefully after going through this here, things will make a little more sense even. You can go back, try them again. And if it comes down to it, you can always ask some questions and we'll take care of you from there. Okay, but on with the notes. So nested loop, the idea is we have one loop within another loop. Okay, a nested loop is a loop with another loop inside of it. And as you can see here, we have our larger for loop on the outside running with O as in outer as the counter. From O gets 1 to O less than or equal to 5. And then within that we have another loop running with int I equals 1 while I is less than or equal to 4. Okay, it looks like we're just doing some printing like we saw in the coding example. Okay, now what I have here for output is one iteration of our outer loop. Okay, one time through the entire structure here. Each time the outer loop runs once, the inner loop runs to completion. Okay, so my outer loop is going to run from O gets 1 while O is less than or equal to 5, so in other words 1 to 5. And each time that runs, this inner loop is going to run to completion. It's going to run from I gets 1 to 4. And one of the big things here is I can't use the same variable for my outer loop and my inner loop. We've got to define something different. Okay, so in other words, we're going to run this inner loop 4 times. And what's this inner loop going to do? Well, it's just going to print a star. Okay, so that's where you're seeing 1, 2, 3, 4 stars. Okay, so my inner loop is run. We'll go system.out.print line to move on to the next line, and then we'll move on to the second time around for my outer loop. Okay, so second time the outer loop runs, again, the inner loop will run and we'll print all 4 stars. Okay, third time the outer loop runs, fourth time the outer loop runs, fifth time the outer loop will run again, and then the inner loop only runs if the outer loop condition is true. So once I get to my O counter variable to be a 6, this while condition on the outer loop is no longer true, so the inner loop will not run. Okay, we'll move on to the rest of our program and run from there. Okay, that's the idea behind nested loops. Okay, again, if you struggle with that star part, feel free to pause the video here, go back, and try those again. Okay, next up, we can make our loops a little bit fancier by actually using the counter variables within the actual loops and within the code run within the loops. Okay, so we're going to say here the counter variable in the outer loop can be used in the inner loop. So notice the counter for my outer loop is an O, and I'm actually using that, okay, within the inner loop. Now I couldn't go the other way around. I could not use this I outside of this inner for loop. Okay, but I can use the O within itself and also within that inner for loop. Okay, let's take a look at what this loop's going to do here. Our outer loop is going to run from 1 to 3, so in other words, run 3 times. And each time it runs, we're going to run the inner loop from I gets 1 to I less than or equal to O. Okay, so here my looping condition is going to depend on what O is, and then I'm just going to print, in other words, that many O's and move on to the next line. Okay, so in other words, instead of printing stars here, we're printing actually what that outer loop variable is. Okay, so first time through, when O is 1, this loop will run from 1 to O, which is 1 times. Okay, so it's only going to run once and print 1 O for the outer, which is just a 1. Okay, second time through, when O is 2, the inner loop will run from 1 to 2, so that's why we're getting the 2 O's here, the 2 2's. And then same idea for the third time through. The last time through, when O is 3, our inner loop's going to run from I, the inner loop, 1 to 3, and that's why we're printing the 3 O's here, the 3 3's. Okay, counting up one more time, O would be at a 4. That doesn't satisfy this while condition, so our loop's done. The inner loop will no longer run, and we'll move on to the next, whatever's next in our code. All right, last thing we're going to talk about is nesting while loops. Now, most situations we're going to have in this class, both the rest of this semester and next semester, when we're talking nesting loops, we're going to be using for loops. Okay, they just kind of are going to fit what we're looking to do better. Okay, but just like you can nest for loops, you can also nest while loops, and you can actually do combinations of the two with a while loop on the outside and a for loop on the inside, or vice versa with the for on the outside, while on the inside. Okay, so not going to be very typical, but let's take a look at how it works. Here I've got my nested loops with a larger while loop on the outside and a smaller while loop as the inner loop as well. Okay, let's kind of take a look at the big picture of what this is going to produce. For our kind of outer loop, we have int out gets 1, and this loop's going to run while out is less than or equal to 2. And if I trace to the end of my code, notice at the very end of this outer while loop, we have out gets out plus 1. So in other words, it counts up at 1. So I know right off the bat, unless there's some other funny stuff happening in here, the outer loop, the whole thing is going to run twice. 1 for out equals 1 and 1 for out equals 2. Okay, when I get into my inner loop then, what's happening, we have a different counter variable for the in loop, for the inner loop. Okay, int in gets 1. Now that is going to get reset to 1 every time we come back through the outer loop. So every time this loop runs, we'll be resetting that to 1. Okay, this loop's going to run while int is less than or equal to 3. It's going to print out with a dash and in, and then count in up by 1 every time. Okay, so every time the outer loop runs once, the inner loop will run from 1 to 3 3 times. Okay, so what is this going to produce? Well, when out is 1, we should get a 1 dash 1 2 3. So let's run through that. So right now I'm going through the first lap through the outer loop. First time through the inner loop, we'll get the 1 1, followed by the 1 2, then the 1 3. Okay, that's it for this inner loop. So we will print a space, count up the out variable, and run through the outer loop a second time, and we'll get that 2 dash 1. Okay, 2 for the value of the outer loop, 1 for the reset value of the inner loop, 2-2, 2-3. And at that point, our simple program here is done. We ran through the inner loop a second time. Out goes up to 3. That's not less than or equal to 2. Okay, we'll move on with our code there. All right, that's it for nested loops. Pretty short and sweet lesson, but yes, this isn't a super easy topic, so we will be spending plenty of time going through examples, giving you practice, working through the labs on this. Okay, we'll stick with it till you get it. All right, so start working on some programs, cranking out some code. Let me know if you need any help, and we'll see you folks later.